Edit.
Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Eric Lindsay, professor of music, back to talk about triads. This will allow us to tell the difference between a number of chord types, which will inform our ability to analyze harmony and later harmonic progressions. So let's get started. A triad is a three-note chord that's constructed of two stacked thirds and bound by an interval of a fifth of some kind. Whether these thirds are major or minor intervals, whether the binding fifth is perfect, diminished, or augmented, is going to result in different qualities of chord. There are four types of triads that we're going to talk about: diminished, minor, major, and augmented. Let's examine how each one of these is built. A minor triad is going to consist of a minor third on the bottom, like A and C, and then a major third on top, like C to E. And a minor triad is bound by a perfect fifth, in this case from A to E. To label a minor triad, we're going to use a lowercase m for minor. A major triad is also bound by a perfect fifth, so let's go A to E again. But this time we're going to place the major third on the bottom. So let's raise C to a C sharp. That makes a major third between A to C sharp. And then a minor third is on top. That's already the case with our C sharp to E. That's a minor third now. To label a major triad, we'll use an uppercase M. A more compressed version of the minor triad is the diminished triad, which is built instead on two minor thirds. So A to C, our minor third, and then C to E flat. Notably, this binding fifth is now compressed into a diminished fifth. Diminished chords will have a small circle beside the chord name or the Roman numeral to indicate that it is diminished. And lastly, we have augmented triads. This is the expanded major triad sounding function, and it's going to have two major thirds, like A to C sharp, and then C sharp to E sharp. And notably, this is now bound not by the perfect fifth, it's expanded, now it's an augmented fifth. And augmented chords are labeled using a plus sign. When in this formation, where we just have stacked thirds on top of each other, the bottom note of this triad is called the root of the triad. The note that's a third above the root is the chordal third, and the note that's a fifth above the root is the chordal fifth. So I'm going to write out a C major scale, and instead of having just a single note per scale degree, I'll build a triad on top of each of these scale steps. And I want you to be able to label whether a chord is major, minor, diminished, or augmented within the key. Go ahead and give it a shot. In the key of C major, a triad whose root is on C is going to have a major third between C and E, followed by a minor third between E and G. The binding fifth is a perfect fifth, so if we confer with our chart, the is the property of a major triad. The second scale degree, our supertonic, is from D to F, a minor third, F to A, a major third, bound by a perfect fifth. That's a minor triad. Same for our median, E to G is minor, and G to B is major. That is a minor triad for 3. 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, and 7, which has a minor third between the leading tone and scale degree 2, and a minor third between scale degree 2 and scale degree 4, and the binding fifth is a diminished fifth. This is a diminished chord. So the arrangement, just like when we were thinking of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, makes the major scale. The chords that are in the major, that are implied by the major scale are major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Every single, no matter where we have the tonic, if we're in a major key, that's going to be the arrangement of major and minor and diminished chords within a key. We use Roman numerals to label each chord according to the scale degree that they're built on. If the chord's in major, we use an uppercase numeral. If it's minor, it's a lowercase numeral. And I recommend just memorizing which chords are major or minor in the key. In the major key, remember, chords built on the first, fourth, and fifth scale degrees are major. Those on the second, third, and sixth are minor. Seventh is diminished. We can also refer back to our circle of fifths. If we're in C, the chord to the right, G, is our 5 chord. To the left, F is another major chord in the key, the 4 chord. Looking at that inner ring of minor relative keys, A minor, the relative minor, is our 6, D minor is the 2, E minor is the 3. So those are the 6 chords in the key of C. The only chord missing is the diminished chord the diminished 7 chord, because the circle of fifths only illustrates major and minor key areas. I also want you to quickly memorize the arrangement of major, minor, and diminished chords in the minor mode also. So if we build triads in the natural minor scale, 1 is minor, 2 is diminished, 3 is major, 4 is minor, 5 is minor unless we turn this into harmonic minor, in which case the leading tone is the major third above the dominant, making this major dominant chord. Flat 6 is major, the subtonic is major, and again, if we raise that to the harmonic minor, that's going to now be built on our leading tone, it's going to be diminished just like it was in the major mode. So commit this to memory. So if I give you a key signature and a root, for example, key signature of G minor and a root of A, that would be a diminished chord. I want you to be able to identify these chords very quickly. If we wanted to go crazy with this scale and change the quality of these chords, let's say we wanted to make the triad with C as its root diminished. These minor triads on D and E, let's make those major instead. Let's say that the triad on F is going to be augmented. How do we do this? We go back to our chart above and we add accidentals until the binding fifth and the order of major and minor thirds match the description of the chords we have above. In this case, if I want a diminished chord on C, that means I need to have a minor third, so that's C to E flat, followed by another minor third, that is going to be E flat to G flat. If I wanted my supertonic to have a major triad there instead, let's raise the third, because we need to make sure there's a major third on the bottom of that chord. Same thing of our minor chord that was on 3, our mediant. Let's go ahead and raise that to major. That means we need to turn that G into a G sharp, making that a major third on the bottom. And then finally, if we wanted that to be an augmented fourth, instead of a major fourth, what do we need to do for augmented? We need 2 major thirds. A to C, we need to raise to a C sharp to make that 2 major thirds, and that is thus a augmented triad. Hopefully we're getting the knack for what are the ways that we are tracking the major and minor thirds to not only identify what are the diatonic meaning of the key and of the scale, what are the natural arrangements of major and minor and diminished chords within the major mode and the minor mode, but also if we were to alter any of these, how do we spell any one of these chord qualities from any given root. Triads are defined by the notes they contain, not necessarily their arrangement. So if we look at a jazz lead sheet, for example, and we see a chord symbol, which is going to contain the root of the chord in addition to symbols indicating the chord quality, a player can interpret the spacing of that chord in any number of ways. Ignoring the sevenths for now, which we'll get at in a later video, you can figure out what notes are going to accompany this melody by spelling a triad on these roots provided, C, E, A, and D, and seeing what they indicate about the chord quality. In jazz shorthand, a root with no additional information suggests a major triad. So for our C major triad, that is going to be root of C, third above that E, third above that a G. Now it's worth noting that for that C, E, and G, playing them anywhere on the piano is going to produce a C major triad. The only difference may be that the chord is voiced in open position, where there might be gaps that could accommodate more chord tones, or in closed position, which is the smallest possible way you could spell this chord with no gaps between the notes that belong to this chord. We could even double the chord, or double just the third, or double just the fifth. We don't label this chord differently if it's in a low octave versus a high octave, or whether the chord's in open or closed position. So any of these options of how we just spell it are considered correct based on how it's indicated here on the staff. The only time we want to be sensitive to how we voice the chords concerns whether we move the chordal third or the chordal fifth to be the lowest note in the triad. This is going to produce an inversion of the chord when the root is not the lowest note. If the first chord in the tune said C/E, that means play a C major triad with an E in the bass, like this. When the root is in the bass, the chord is in root position. And if the third is in the bass, it's in first inversion. And if the fifth is in the bass, it's in second inversion. Classical and Baroque music is going to use a different system of indicating whether a chord is to be played in root position or in an inversion. And that's through the use of figured bass, which I'll introduce in brief now, and we'll delve into it further in another video. In figured bass notation, root position chords are going to be indicated by a 5/3 figure beneath the staff. That's going to indicate that there is a third and a fifth to be played above a given bass note. First inversion triads, which plays the chordal third on the bass, is going to introduce a 6th into the mix. Now there's a generic sixth and a third being played above the bass. And in second inversion, there's now a generic sixth and fourth above this bass note. So 6/4 is going to be indicating a chord in second inversion. When we are identifying a chord in context, it's going to involve 3 steps. Number 1, identifying the notes of the chord, arranging them in closed position without rearranging which note is in the bass, and determining the chord's quality. If there are only thirds involved, this chord's in root position. If there's a fourth on top, the chord's in first inversion. If the fourth is on the bottom, it's in second inversion. So for example, given the notes D, A, and F, rearranging them as D, F, and A is going to form a stack of thirds with D as the root, F is the third, and A is the fifth. We know this to be a D minor triad. So pause the video to see if you can identify the bass note, the position, and the figure of these other notes that I'm providing here for you. So in this next example, I see an E, a C, and a G sharp. If I space this into just triad formation, so it's just stacks of thirds, that would be C, E, and G sharp. That would be a augmented triad where the root is C. But seeing as how we have the E, the chordal third, in the bass, that makes it in first inversion. And I could label this with a 6/3 symbol to show that we're in first inversion. For the next triad, we have an F sharp, a D, and a B. If I wanted to put this in the smallest possible formation, I would have to build it on thirds if B was in the bottom. B to D is a third, and D to F sharp is a third, meaning this is a B minor chord. And seeing as how the F sharp is in the bottom note, and that is the chordal fifth of that chord, this is a second inversion triad, a second inversion B minor triad. And 6/4 would be the symbol that I would use there. And then lastly, we have a C in the bass with an A and an E flat. If I needed to try and compress this again into just stacked thirds, I would need to have the A in the bass, a third above that is the C, a third above that is the E flat. That is a diminished triad, and that C is in the bass, that's the chordal third. So that is a 6/3 position, it's a first inversion triad. That is a diminished chord on A. So lastly, I want to see if you can connect our triad identification, including inversion, back to what we know about key signatures to identify triads in the context of a major or a minor key. So if I, for instance, gave you an F major key signature and wrote E, G, and C, I want you first of all to figure out what the root of this chord is. If we were to rewrite this chord, so it's just a series of stacked thirds without any fourths in it, we would need to put the C on the bottom. If we figured out that C is the root and we're in the key of F, I'd want you to figure out where is C in the F major scale. And if we count it up from F, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we see that C is our 5 chord, our dominant triad. So I'll label a 5 here. And if I've memorized the fact that 5 is a major triad in the major mode, I can just write an uppercase 5 without having to check if there's a major third in the bottom of this chord. If I didn't remember that, we can refer to a chart or just go ahead and analyze C to E is major and E to G is minor, and it's bound by a perfect fifth, and that's the quality of a major chord. And finally, I'll show that the chordal third is in the bass, as we saw in the previous examples, not the root, so we're going to write down a 6/3 figure beside this Roman numeral. See if you can do the same for the next 3 examples. In the last example, I'm just going to give you the key in the Roman numeral. I want you to be able to write the notes on paper. Go ahead and give it a shot. Pause the video while you do that work. So I gave you a key signature and just went ahead and told you it was A flat, so we weren't thinking that it was possibly F minor. So looking over here, we can see that there's a fourth on the bottom, which to me suggests that it is a second inversion triad. So I'll write down 6/4. And if I looked at what the root of that chord is, the root of that is an E flat chord. So it's E flat, G, and B flat are the notes. That's a E flat major triad in the key of A flat. That is our dominant. A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat. That's the fifth. So a 5/6/4 is how we would analyze that. For the B flat major example, I have a E flat, G, and C notated. If I see a fourth on top, that is showing me that this is a first inversion triad. We could just try moving that C down to the bottom to see if that is in fact the root position. And oh, look, lo and behold, that is a C minor triad. And so if I'm in the key of B flat and C minor That's my 2 chord. That's C is the second scale degree in B flat. And I know that 2 in major mode is a minor chord. I would then write down this is a 2, 6, because that is in first inversion. Next, I have D major is the indicated key. And we have, again, a 4th on top. 4th on top in the triad is meaning that this is a first inversion triad. If we move that C sharp down at the bottom, this is C sharp to E, which is a diminished third, E to G, which is another diminished third. So this is a diminished triad. And if it's built on C sharp and we're in the key of D, that is our 7 chord. And that makes sense because we know that 7 is a diminished triad in the major key. Because it's in first inversion, I would say this is a 7 diminished 6. And then lastly, I provided a key signature of F minor, and I just wrote down 5, 6. So my first job is to think in the key of F minor, what is the 5 chord? What is my dominant chord? So we can count on up from F being scale degree 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's C. And remember that this is, 5 could be a minor chord in the natural minor, but this is a capital indicating a major triad there on 5. So that means we need to go ahead and raise the leading tone. So E flat is going to be raised to an E natural. So this is basically a C major chord, but because I said 5, 6, we're not putting the root at the bottom. The chordal third is going to be at the bottom of this chord. So E natural, G, and C is how we would spell the notes of that chord. So we covered a lot in this video, ranging from chord qualities to Roman numerals to inversions to chords within a key. So I can recognize that this might be a lot. If anything feels spotty, go back and revisit these concepts before we expand our chord analyses to include 7th chords, because there's even more figured bass to learn here. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, go back and hit up any spots until you feel pretty good about adding new stuff into the mix. I look forward to seeing you soon.